Hello, I hope you're doing well today. So we are going to go through the digestive system, and there was a sheet on D2L for you to print out. Once again, I always forget to get this laser pointer. You're probably getting sick of that by now. Okay, so hopefully you have a sheet, so go ahead and print that out, and hopefully you have something to color with or highlight with. And we are just going to follow the path that food takes, and then we'll color the accessory structures. So we ingest food into the oral cavity, so I just colored that red. And so we have ingestion that occurs there. Remember, you're supposed to know your shuns. We chew our food, which is called mastication. This is where a bolus forms, which is that moistened lump of food. We have our food mixed with saliva, and saliva has salivary amylase, so we are going to begin our chemical digestion of carbohydrates. This is also the place where the voluntary phase of deglutition, which that's the fancy word for swallowing, where that occurs. So the salivary glands, there's 3 different ones, and I just picked to color them all in blue. But the role of saliva, it's going to moisten our food, which allows us to taste it. It helps prepare it for swallowing. We're going to get saliva, which is mostly water, and some mucus, but that mucus is going to help it slide down. We have salivary amylase. Amylase breaks down starch. Starch is a complex carbohydrate, and we break off those glucose units in 2 pieces, which is maltose. Saliva is our first line of defense. Part of that, keep them out. There are antimicrobial proteins, lysozymes, also antibodies. Secretory IgA is also in saliva. Remember, antibodies neutralize things and target them for destruction. These are under autonomic control. Cranial nerves 7 and 10 control the salivary glands. So parasympathetic innervation increases salivation. Sympathetic innervation decreases salivation. So that first one that we're going to color, that is your largest, they are alongside the ear. They are called the parotid glands. These glands, when infected by a virus, that's where you get the disease mumps, so peritonitis. And mumps has pretty much been eradicated by the MMR vaccine. The parotid glands make mostly a serous-type mucus, which is high in amylase. The next glands we're going to color, those are the submandibular glands. So they are in the medial aspect of the mandible. So submandibular glands. They make sort of a mixed type of saliva, so watery, mucus, and some amylase. And then underneath the tongue are the smallest of the salivary glands. They make mostly a thick kind of mucousy saliva. Sub means below. Lingual always refers to tongue. Feel free to pause me at any time if I'm moving too quickly for you. You know you can do that. So we begin swallowing, that voluntary phase of deglutition in the oral cavity. The tongue pushes that bolus up against the hard palate, rolls back, and then the food will travel to the pharynx. The pharynx is a passageway for food and for air, so it has a shared function. The part immediately posterior to the oral cavity is the oropharynx. Like I said, as soon as the bolus hits the back of the throat, then it's going to be reflex. And so that's the involuntary stage of deglutition begins. And then inferior to the oropharynx is the laryngopharynx. And so the food will follow this route. When we go to swallow, the larynx rises, the epiglottis tips back, and then to this upper esophageal sphincter is going to open. So go ahead and color in your upper esophageal sphincter. Hopefully you are connecting your diagram. So I did mine with color. If you want to draw a line, that's fine, but I want to make sure that you know what things are and you know the function that's associated with them. I'm going to be asking you these things on your final exam. You have a list of organs. You need to know their functions, so this is going to help you study. So upper esophageal sphincter marks the superior or the proximal part of the esophagus. And so then the esophagus is the tube that's going to carry food by peristalsis through the mediastinum. Normally the opening for the esophagus is closed. That is to prevent air from getting into the stomach. You know, when we get excess air, we have to burp. And so normally it's closed. And then when there's food, the upper esophageal sphincter opens, and then we get peristalsis moving the food to our next organ, which is the stomach. Things that were unique about the esophagus: it has, the whole tract has the same 4 layers, so the mucosa, the submucosa, the muscularis, and the serosa usually. But remember, the esophagus has the adventitia, and is the only organ that has that. So think about it testing purposes. When I want you to say esophagus, and I want you to know that I'm talking about the esophagus, that's something special to remember about it. At the distal end of the esophagus, there's also a sphincter, so a sphincter between the esophagus and the stomach. So it's called the lower esophageal sphincter. And this is the one that's the wimpy sphincter, so when it fails, the acidic contents of the stomach enter the esophagus, and it creates that burning sensation of heartburn or reflux. The next organ is the stomach. And the stomach is a muscular sac. It's sort of J-shaped, so we have this fundus portion up here tucked underneath the right side of the diaphragm. Its function is it's going to store food. It has rugae, so it has those folds to accommodate stretch. This is where chyme is going to form. We're going to mix that bolus with gastric juice, which contains pepsin and hydrochloric acid, an intrinsic factor. That intrinsic factor is there so we can absorb vitamin B12 and avoid pernicious anemia. Other things that are special about the stomach: we're going to begin our protein digestion. Also, this is where chyme is formed. So chyme is just that liquefied food. And then don't forget, the stomach has that unique inner third oblique layer. Oblique, so it's diagonal. So outer longitudinal, then circular, and then a unique inner oblique. And that's why the stomach can churn and pummel our food, and it's responsible for mechanical digestion. It's going to liquefy our food into chyme, but also, you know, when we have emesis or we're vomiting, that's what that means, we know that the stomach is quite capable of projectile emptying itself, and that is due to that unique oblique layer. At the distal end of the stomach, we have another sphincter. That sphincter is called the pyloric sphincter. And so remember, that is the gatekeeper that's going to control stomach emptying. So just kind of draw a little sphincter in there and connect it to that label. So the next organ that the food is going to enter is the small intestine. So remember, there's 3 parts to the small intestine, so we're going to color them separately, and then we'll look at their function down below. So the duodenum is that proximal part. Chyme is going to enter. We're going to get some pancreatic juice and also bile from the liver. So we have this great intersection of all of those things meet. We're going to begin our fat digestion. This is the main site for digestion and absorption in the small intestine. Not saying the rest of it doesn't matter, just saying most of the magic is going to happen in the duodenum. So the duodenum, it makes a C loop, and it sort of cradles the head of this pancreas, and then it's going to come back out over here on the upper left quadrant. As soon as it comes into the peritoneal folds, or has a mesentery, that's when it becomes the middle portion of the small intestine, the jejunum. So the middle portion is the jejunum. About 1/3 is jejunum, and then 2/3 is going to be ileum, which is our third portion, or the most distal portion of the small intestine. So duodenum, jejunum, ileum. There is no hard, fast landmark between the jejunum and the ileum. The structure somewhat changes. The walls get somewhat thinner when you get to the ileum, and then those visible Peyer's patches, that mucosa-associated lymphatic tissue, you can see those in the ileum. We have a sphincter between the small intestine and the large intestine. That first part of the large intestine is called the cecum. The distal part of the small intestine is the ileum. So this is the ileocecal valve right here. So there's the label for it. The ileocecal valve, or you can call it the ileocecal sphincter. And so that is going to make sure that our wastes do not back up into the small intestine. So the small intestine, if you look down here at the bottom of your page, The final digestion and all nutrient absorption is going to occur in the small intestine. Some anatomical features that you're only going to find in the small intestine are the circular folds, the villi, and the microvilli. And all of those are to increase surface area for digestion and absorption. The special movements that occur in the small intestine are segmentation and that migrating motility complex. Of course, when you get digestion and propulsion, those peristaltic waves pretty much happen throughout the gastrointestinal tract. Okay, so now our undigestible waste is going to enter the large intestine. This part of the large intestine that just sort of pooches down below the ileocecal valve, that is called the cecum. So that is part of the colon. Dangling right there between the intersection of the small intestine and the large intestine is going to be the appendix. And so this is lymphatic tissue, so mucosa-associated lymphatic tissue. It is a blind-ended sac. Its positive function would be as a bacterial reservoir of good bacteria. However, if there are bad bacteria or there's dysbiosis and imbalance in the microflora or microbiota, then you can get appendicitis. Appendicitis just means inflammation of the appendix. Doesn't tell you the cause, but this is a structure that does not stretch well, nor can it drain. So if it bursts, then any bacteria from the colon can get out into the peritoneum and cause peritonitis. Then a patient can go septic and get bacteria in the bloodstream, which can then lead to shock. Okay, so from the cecum, now the waste products, they're going to move basically from haustrum to haustrum up the right side of the body, and so that is called the ascending colon, because we're working our way up. So ascending colon. Then there's a turn right here at the liver. So this turn portion is called the hepatic flexure. Hepatic, hepato always refers to liver. Going across the body is the transverse colon. So now we're up here in the upper left quadrant. So transverse colon. And we're going to make a turn at the spleen. So this organ tucked up behind the stomach is the spleen. So this is called the splenic flexure. Then the waste products are going to move down. So this region is called the descending colon. And it's good to know where these parts of the colon are. When people get polyps, they'll generally say what area of the colon someone has polyps or cancer. So cecum, ascending colon, hepatic flexure, transverse colon, splenic flexure, descending colon. And then there's this little S move. You can kind of see how it makes this little turn. Our exit portal is midline. And so that region is called the sigmoid colon, which is this little turn move. The sigmoid colon right here. So all of those regions make up what's called the colon, or the large intestine. So the large intestine over here, its main function is to absorb water and electrolytes and for the elimination of feces. There are bacteria that are capable of digesting our non-digestible wastes, and any monomer units that are released by the bacteria then can be absorbed through the large intestine. There are no digestive enzymes being released from the large intestine, so that's what's meant by no digestive function. We can absorb some things that bacteria break down for us. They make vitamins for us. We can absorb those, but there's no digestive function in the large intestine. Their number one thing is to absorb water and electrolytes and for the elimination of feces. The anatomical features are the haustrum. Haustra is plural, haustrum is singular, and those are those little pooches, those little pouches. Other anatomical features of the Tinea coli, those are those three outer longitudinal bands of smooth muscle. They are what are responsible for that mass movement that occurs when we are eating, when food is received in the stomach. It stretches the walls of the stomach, so we get the gastrocolic reflex. And then there's a large mass movement that moves feces into the rectum. Okay, so of course I colored it brown for you. Okay, so the rectum, that is the place of fecal storage before defecation. When those muscles are stretched or the walls of the rectum are stretched and sufficiently full, that can stimulate the defecation reflex. Those internal anal sphincters are going to relax. And then we have the external anal sphincters, which are voluntary skeletal muscles that flank the anal canal. And you know you can just clench and go, oh, not right now. And then that urge will pass. So there you go, the external anal sphincters. And so those are the sphincters that control fecal continence. And then the exit portal is the anus. Okay, so now we're going to color the accessory structure. So this large organ over here is the liver. It is your largest internal organ. Your largest organ is your skin. The liver has a whole lot of functions. As far as digestion, it's going to make and secrete bile. Bile is going to be made. It's going to flow out the ducts, which we're going to label and talk about. And then the bile goes into, there it is, into the duodenum. So bile emulsifies fats, and in pancreatic lipases then are going to be responsible for the digestion of fats. It also filters and detoxifies blood. It has a role in basically controlling every nutrient in our body. So working with the pancreas, so blood glucose levels, amino acid stores. It also stores fat and detoxifies blood. So that's what I mean by plus, 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 plus. Stores vitamins. So it has a whole lot of other functions. So that is the liver. But we're talking about digestion. So it's going to make bile, and then the bile is going to flow from the right lobe and the left lobe through the right and left hepatic ducts. When those two ducts merge, so right there in yellow, that's when it becomes the common hepatic duct. And the common hepatic duct is going to, you can't see in this picture, it's going to end at the hepatopancreatic sphincter. And then when that sphincter is open, bile is released into the duodenum. If there's no digestion going on and the hepatopancreatic sphincter is closed, what happens is the bile backs up. And the bile backs up and is stored by the gallbladder. So there's the gallbladder. That is a muscular sac. Its job is to store bile. While the bile is being stored, water is being absorbed, so it's also being concentrated. When you eat a meal that's high in protein and fat, there's a release of cholecystokinin, CCK, from the cells in the duodenum. So intestinal cells, those enteroendocrine cells, release cholecystokinin. Cholecystokinin, that name tells you what it's going to do. Chol means bile, cyst means sac, and kinin means to move. So it's a hormone that's going to get that bile sac to move. We'll get contraction of the gallbladder and opening of the hepatopancreatic sphincter. So we're going to get bile-rich juice coming from the gallbladder that's going to help us to emulsify our fats and digest them. The pancreatic lipases will digest them. So we've got the gallbladder, and then this duct that's going to join the common hepatic duct is called the cystic duct. What can happen in the gallbladder is that salts can precipitate and form gallstones. And gallstones often are going to get trapped in that cystic duct or in the canaliculi in the gallbladder. And so that's a common place for gallstones. If someone has gallstones, then that gallbladder is going to be removed, and they'll try to leave parts of it, or part of the ampulla, just a little part of the gallbladder, to allow for some storage of bile. But you can live without your gallbladder. Okay, our next accessory structure is the pancreas. You can find the head of the pancreas curled up in that C of the duodenum. So just like the duodenum is just cradling the head of the pancreas. So this right here is the pancreas. The pancreas has both exocrine and endocrine function. The exocrine function, it's going to secrete bicarbonate and those digestive enzymes into the duodenum. And there, that going through, there's the pancreatic duct. We'll color that in a minute. You might want to not color over that. Its endocrine function, it plays a role in regulating our blood glucose levels. So after a meal that we've eaten, then it's going to release insulin, and that's going to tell the body to store carbohydrates. So it's going to lower blood glucose levels. If we're fasting or we're exercising, when the glucose is gone, then it relieves glucagon, and that tells the liver to release the storehouse, the stored glycogen in the form of glucose, to raise our blood glucose levels. Also will stimulate lipolysis, so the breakdown of fat. And there you go. I just went ahead and drew in the pancreatic duct. So that's the duct in which the bicarbonate, pancreatic juice, and all the digesting enzymes, so pancreatic amylase, pancreatic protease, and pancreatic lipases and nucleases will all exit out that pancreatic duct into the duodenum, that magical great intersection. Okay, so hopefully your picture looks somewhat like mine. Do make sure that you write your name on your paper before you upload it to the appropriate Dropbox under assignments. Have a great day.